In Canada, the rules for smoking are governed at the provincial level and has become a very regulated industry. And as with any regulated industry, some very bizarre contradictions come up when you try spelling everything out. Anything that involves smoking, whether it's the act of smoking, the selling, the manufacturing, all have rules. The problem with long, complicated rules are there's tons of exceptions. Once you start specifying what you can and cannot do, it becomes more obvious as to how stupid the law really is. It's not about whether you are for smoking or against smoking. As an ex-smoker, I don't care. You do your thing, I do my thing. Unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way, and I'll explain why. Regardless of what you think of smoking, you're going to find my insights fascinating as I explain to you the paradox of smoking and how governments created this mess and how they can do this to any industry. Tobacco and smoking was part of the Native American culture, which the European settlers adopted. Like any other habit-forming drug, people abused tobacco, and the ceremonial use was dropped in favor for the day-to-day use. Europeans really loved their tobacco. But the real regulations on the use of tobacco didn't really happen until the 1960s. Yes, there were rules in the book before then about who you could sell it to and to whom, but it wasn't really enforced. Most people didn't care, but there were a few people that did, and regulation was coming. Another thing that was happening at the same time was smoking was proven to be dangerous, now backed by scientific facts. Regardless of the scientific facts, I'm sure that nobody thought it was full of vitamin C. But I do agree that most people didn't realize how bad it was, and more evidence kept proving this to be true. But there was a group of people that didn't like this smoker's world, and the way to end it was to get the government to do it for them. Telling a smoker not to smoke will not do you any good, but if you can have the power of the state to enforce your will, then the smoker has to listen. And that is exactly what happened. Tobacco changes move slowly because many politicians smoked, and probably half the population at the time just smoked. You can't outright just ban it. But during the 80s and 90s is when the existing laws were enforced and added to eventually banning smoking in certain spots, to banning smoking in all public places. Let's be clear here. I'm not saying that the regulations didn't help the public at large. We are healthier, save money on something we didn't need, and stop people and buildings from stinking of old smoke. Sure, smoking had a lot of negatives, and I'm not suggesting we go back to that, but I am saying the way that was done was disturbing, to say it the least. These are my opinions, and I will say that I dislike the way the government did what they did. The approach is not surprising, but it is disturbing. It's the old question, do the ends justify the means? And there's a lot of them out there to say that it is. Smoking rules are decided at the provincial level in Canada, so I can only really speak about Ontario, as that's where I live. You may find similar stories where you live too, but I dislike the government telling private businesses that people can't smoke in their building. The law should have said that owners must post signs saying the smoking is allowed in this building, and if you enter, that's up to you. The laws are not defined freedom of choice, but about setting an agenda. They told some retailers, like pharmacies, you can't sell tobacco products anymore. As long as they were following the rules, the government should have never prohibited any retailer from selling tobacco. They took away all methods for the manufacturer to advertise. TV and radio were the first to go, then magazines, then sponsorships, and eventually even the company's logo. And let's not forget that all the packaging must show pictures of gross people dying on the cover. Now we're at the point that all tobacco needs to be covered up, and unless you ask, you have no idea what product is in the store. There has been countless lawsuits against tobacco company for selling the public a dangerous product. I'd always thought the governments were hypocritical in saying the problem was all about the manufacturer's fault, and none of it was about the government's, claiming they were victims too. The answer, of course, is that it was convenient to point fingers at somebody else instead of taking responsibility for their involvement in the tobacco health issues. Regardless of what you think about tobacco products, it is important to remember that the government can do this to any industry, and I find this very disturbing. We should not have given them that kind of power, and we did. I don't care if it was for the greater good. If you give that kind of power to anyone or any group or any government, and you think that it will only be used on the designated target, you are mistaken. This power can be used again, and we should be concerned. The paradox comes in when you see with your own eyes that the law no longer makes any common sense. All of it comes back to special interest groups pushing an agenda combined with the philosophical of the government's never wrong and never makes mistakes. I will give you several examples. Many years ago, I went to a Good Friday event that was held at a school. They had candles burning, and then someone lit up some incense and some sage. I watched it burn, and the smoke raise up in the air, and when it was break time, I watched the smokers go outside and have a cigarette. And I thought, wow, why can you burn some stuff in a school, but not tobacco, other than the fact the law says you can't? There are many different categories of smoke, and while they're not the same, I don't know. That was my introduction to the paradox of smoking. Another bizarre paradox happened when I was at my local city hosting a rib fest, a food event held at the downtown park. Signs were all around the entrance of the park that this was a smoke-free event. Well, not exactly. The ribs were cooked in a charcoal barbecue, and it was anything but smokeless. They were trying to convince me that charcoal smoke is somehow better for me than tobacco smoke. Why wasn't all smoke banned? I never figured out why smoke is not smoke. Why there's different types of smoke. I really mean that. Why does smoke from, quote, drugs, it could end you up in jail, where smoke from tobacco could leave you with a fine, to smoke from cooking or sage simply just be forgiven? I truly don't get that. As a side note, I can't figure out why the government classifies vaping with the same laws as smoking. There's no smoke in vaping. That's what vaping means. Vapor. I also find it bizarre that the federal government has recently allowed marijuana to be sold and smoked. How does that fit into a smoke-free Canada? I understand tobacco was grandfathered in as being a legal product, but marijuana hasn't been legal for almost 100 years. For some reason, it was brought back. I just don't get it. The government loves to overtax tobacco, control it, demonetize it, sue the manufacturer for it, but they apparently don't want to outlaw it. Is that what the limit is? Outright banning is too far, but we'll go as far as we can up to the edge? Why? I am sure there's some legal reason that they don't want 1 million people in jail for smoking a cigarette, which is likely the same reason that pot is legal. Just don't tell me that it all makes sense, because it doesn't. The point is for me to do me and for them to do them. But that's not what happens, does it? There are always a few people that try to convince the government that my way is right and everyone should follow my way. I wonder how many people understand that if you build a monster to destroy a monster, then the monster you built is now strong enough to destroy you too. Perhaps it's too much to expect the government not to be governments, but it makes your head hurt if you do. But with that, I say goodbye, and may you have many happy thoughts until next time. Written, read, and produced by